The ballroom glowed with 100 candles, their flames dancing against gilded mirrors and silk curtains the color of a summer sky. Laughter rippled through the crowd like bubbles of champagne rising in crystal glasses. Ladies in emerald and ruby gowns twirled across the polished marble floors, their jewels catching the light with each graceful turn. The air smelled of roses, vanilla cake, and expensive perfume, an aroma that spoke of wealth, celebration, and lives lived without care. But Mara Ashford didn't smell any of those aromas. She stood at the edge of the great hall, a silver tray balanced in her calloused hands, watching her younger sister, Lydia, command the center of the room. Lydia, 28 years old and radiant with the confidence of a woman who had never heard the word no, placed a jewel-encrusted hand on her swollen belly, her fourth child growing beneath layers of blue silk. Her laughter echoed, bright and carefree, as friends and admirers gathered around her like moths to a flame. Mara's dress itself was gray, not silver, not pearly, but the lifeless gray of ashes left for too long in a cold fireplace. The fabric was clean but worn, the kind of garment that becomes invisible in a room full of colors. Her hands, reddened from years of washing dishes and changing diapers, gripped the tray tighter as she navigated between groups of guests who never really noticed her. She had learned to make herself small. It was a skill honed over 15 years, the ability to exist in a space without taking up any room, to serve without being served, to give without receiving. A little hand tugged at her skirt. Mara looked down and found Thomas, her 5-year-old nephew, his round little face smeared with chocolate frosting. His eyes, the same warm brown as hers, gazed at her with the uncomplicated affection of a child who didn't yet understand the invisible lines that divided people into those who mattered and those who didn't. "Aunt Mara," he whispered, his voice carrying the lisp of his missing front teeth, "why don't you dance?" The question landed like a stone thrown into still water. Mara's practiced, thoughtful smile spread across her face before she even registered the pain behind it. "Ants don't dance, dear," she said softly, bending down to wipe the chocolate from his chin with the tip of her apron. "Especially old ants. Now go play with your cousins." Thomas's face wrinkled in confusion, a question forming on his lips, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the air like a knife through silk. "Mara, darling!" Lydia's voice echoed through the ballroom with the ease of someone accustomed to being heard. Conversations around her paused, heads turning like sunflowers following the sun. Mara straightened, the tray suddenly heavier in her hands. "You forgot to refill the champagne glasses at the north table," Lydia called, her smile wide and radiant, her eyes sharp as cut glass. "The Vandermeers are waiting." Heat rose up Mara's neck. She could feel the weight of 50 pairs of eyes landing on her, assessing, judging, filing her away in the category of helper or perhaps poor relative. Neither option was flattering. "Of course," Mara said, her voice firm despite the burning in her chest. "I'll take care of it immediately." She turned to leave, but Catherine, the middle sister, at 35, glided up to her with the practiced grace of a woman who had married well and never let anyone forget it. "Of course," Mara said, her voice firm despite the burning in her chest. "I'll take care of it immediately." She turned to leave, but Catherine, the middle sister, at 35, glided up to her with the practiced grace of a woman who had married well and never let anyone forget it. Her dress was dark green, cut to show off a figure maintained by having other people raise her children. Diamond earrings dangled from her ears, catching the light with every movement of her perfectly combed hair. "Forgive her, Lydia," Catherine said, her voice loud enough to be heard, but shrouded in a veneer of false sweetness. "At 42, one's memory isn't what it used to be. Age does terrible things to the mind." Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. It wasn't cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of polite amusement that cut deeper than outright mockery. It was the laughter of people grateful not to be the target, savoring the small thrill of seeing someone else stumble. Mara's fingers gripped the tray until her knuckles turned white. Beatrice, the third sister, at 32, joined them, a vision in pink silk. She had always been the prettiest of the four, with golden hair that curled naturally and cornflower-colored eyes. She linked her arm with Catherine's, presenting a unified front of youth, beauty, and casual cruelty. "Oh, leave her alone, Catherine," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with false compassion. "At least she's useful for something. Imagine if we had to raise our own children." She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "I shudder to think about it." "True," Lydia agreed, one hand still resting on her pregnant belly like a crown. "Honestly, Mara, you should thank us. We gave you a purpose. What would you be without our children to care for? Just another spinster aunt gathering dust in an empty house." The hall fell silent. Not completely silent. The music still played, conversations still murmured at the edges, but in the circle around the Ashford sisters, the air became thick and heavy. Guests exchanged glances, some embarrassed, others secretly amused by the casual cruelty of women who had never known consequences. An elderly lady, Lady Pemberton, with snow-white hair and a purple dress from a bygone era, leaned toward her companion and whispered, her hoarse voice carrying further than she intended. Poor thing. 15 years as the spinster aunt and not a single proposal. Some women simply weren't made for marriage. Her companion, a man with a waxed mustache and an air of superiority, nodded in agreement. "Well, she's had her time, hasn't she? 42 years. The marriage market closes long before that for most women." "That's true," Lady Pemberton sighed. "At least she's found a way to be useful. Every family needs someone to do the work that others don't want to do." The words struck Mara like stones. Each one found a vulnerable spot, a crack in the armor she had built up over the years. She had become adept at not listening, at letting cruel words slide across her surface like water over stone. But tonight, surrounded by the remnants of her dreams and the living evidence of all she had sacrificed, the words found their mark. Tears stung her eyes. She blinked them back hard, refusing to cry, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Excuse me," Mara murmured, her voice so low it was barely heard over the murmur of conversations that were starting up again. She turned, her simple skirts rustling against the marble floor as she walked away, the tray forgotten on a side table. No one called her back. No one apologized. No one noticed. Except for Thomas, who watched with wide, confused eyes as his favorite aunt disappeared into the shadows beyond the glow of the candles. Mara climbed the narrow stairs leading to the attic on the 3rd floor, her legs heavy, her heart even heavier. Each step was familiar, worn by years of nightly climbs to the small room she had called her own since she was a girl. Even when her sisters married and moved away, even when larger rooms became vacant, no one ever suggested that Mara should have a better space. After all, why would she need to? The room was small, barely big enough for a narrow bed, a chest of drawers with a cracked mirror, and an old trunk at the foot of the bed. There was no luxury here, no silk curtains or soft carpets. The wooden floor was bare, the wallpaper faded and peeling at the edges. But it was hers, the only space in the entire Ashford estate that belonged solely to her. She closed the door gently behind her and pressed her back against it, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back to fall. They came silently, warm trails running down her cheeks, wetting the collar of her gray dress. 15 years. 15 years had passed since Lydia, then just a 13-year-old girl with big eyes and bigger dreams, had begged Mara to babysit her first baby, just for one night. One night turned into a week into a month, and before Mara knew it, she had become the surrogate mother not only for Lydia's child, but eventually for all 7. Catherine had approached her the next year,
at 23, newly married and completely unprepared for the reality of motherhood. "You're so much better with children than I am," Catherine had said, her blue eyes wide with calculated pleading. "Just until I adjust." Beatrice arrived last, but her expectation was the most shameless. "Well, you're already taking care of the other 6, she had said with a shrug, leaving her newborn daughter at the front door.
With a diaper bag, and not even a thank you. Mara had accepted everything. Because at first she had thought it was temporary. Because she believed she would be appreciated. Because at 27, still hopeful and naive, she had thought that sacrifice would be seen, that kindness would be rewarded. She had thought that waiting would be worthwhile. Mara walked to the trunk at the foot of her bed and knelt before it. Her hands trembled as she lifted the heavy lid, the scent of cedar and mildew rising to greet her. Inside, carefully folded beneath years of unsent letters and forgotten memories, lay the dress. It was blue. Not the soft, innocent blue of Lydia's silk, but a deep, rich blue, the color of the night sky just before the stars appear. She had bought it with her own savings at 27, when she still believed that one day she would wear ball gowns, that she would be invited not to serve, but to dance. He had waited 15 years. Mara took off the dress, the fabric unfolding in her hands like a dream she'd forgotten she'd had. It was outdated now, the style of a bygone era, the sleeves too puffy, the waist too high. But it was still beautiful, despite its age, or perhaps because of it. She held it close, turned to the cracked mirror hanging above her dresser. The woman staring back at her was both unfamiliar and terrifyingly familiar at the same time. 42 years stared back at her. Not old exactly, but not younger either. There were strands of silver weaving through her dark brown hair, lines at the corners of her eyes telling stories of shared laughter and worries. Her face wasn't smooth and lineless like her sisters' faces, carefully maintained with expensive creams and stress-free lives. But it wasn't expressionless either. It was the face of a woman who had lived, who had loved, even if she had never been loved in return in the way that mattered, who had given and given and given until there was almost nothing left for herself. "Enough," Mara whispered to her reflection, her voice breaking. "Enough waiting. Enough waiting." She folded the dress slowly, carefully, as if preparing a body for burial. In a sense, she was. She was burying the girl who had bought this dress, the woman who had believed that patience would be rewarded, that sacrifice would be noticed, that waiting would be worthwhile. Mara placed the dress at the bottom of the trunk, under letters and mementos, burying it beneath the years that had passed. She slammed the lid shut with a definitive bang that echoed through the small room like a door closing. That night, she was putting away her ball gown. Tonight, she accepted it. She was just the spinster aunt, and it always would be. Morning came very early, as it always did when you had 7 children to feed and no help to do it. Light filtered through the small window of Mara's room as she dressed in the same gray dress from the night before. There was no time to change clothes. There was no time to think about last night, the words spoken, the laughter that still echoed in her ears. There was only time to work. The kitchen was already chaotic when Mara came downstairs. Pots clinked, children screamed, and the smell of burnt porridge hung in the air like a warning cloud. 12-year-old Emma, the eldest of the 7, was desperately trying to stop baby Sophie from pulling the tablecloth off the table. 8-year-old twins George and William were fighting over the last slice of bread. 10-year-old Clara wept silently in a corner, her favorite doll decapitated in some childhood accident. 6-year-old Henry was drawing on the walls with charcoal, and Thomas, her little Thomas, sat amidst the chaos, eating biscuit crumbs from the floor. Mara didn't pause. She had learned long ago that stopping to breathe in moments like this was inviting disaster. "Emma, get Sophie before she hurts herself. George, William, stop immediately or there will be no dessert for a week.
"Clara, darling, bring the doll here and I'll fix it after breakfast. Henry, put down that coal now or you'll wash all the walls of the house with it. Thomas, off the floor, you know it's disgusting." The words came out automatically, refined by years of practice. The children obeyed, not because they feared Mara, but because they knew that when she spoke in that tone, she was serious. Within minutes, the chaos had transformed into relative order. The children were seated at the table, bowls of warm porridge before them, minor disputes temporarily forgotten in favor of food. Mara moved among them, serving, cleaning, comforting, her presence the invisible force that held everything together. The kitchen door opened, and Lydia entered, still in her silk dressing gown, yawning delicately behind a perfectly manicured hand. Her hair was disheveled from sleep, but in a way that seemed deliberately messy, as if she had practiced it. "Good heavens, Mara, the children are so noisy this morning," Lydia complained, sliding into a chair at the far end of the table, away from the children. "Couldn't you make them quiet for a bit? I barely slept after the party last night." Mara gripped the wooden spoon in her hand, but kept her voice calm. "They're children, Lydia. Children make noise." "And you're the babysitter," Lydia retorted, examining her nails. "Do your job." The words hung in the air, spoken so casually, so naturally, as if they carried no weight at all. As if Mara really was nothing more than a paid maid. Except she had never been paid. She had never been asked. She had never been seen as anything more than convenient. Before Mara could answer, before she could decide if this time, perhaps this time, she would say what she really thought, a thunderous bang echoed through the house.
Not a polite knock. Not the kind of knock polite guests made, but a knock that demanded attention, that commanded obedience, that wouldn't accept being ignored. Bang! 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 The children froze, spoons halfway to their mouths. Lydia straightened, her eyebrows furrowing in irritation. Even Mara paused, her heart suddenly beating faster for reasons she couldn't name. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. The front door swung open. Deep, masculine voices, the kind of voices used to give orders and expect them to be obeyed, exchanged words with the family butler. And then the kitchen door opened again. A man entered. No, not a man, Mara mentally corrected. A guard. He wore armor, but not the ordinary armor of the local soldiers. This armor was polished to a gleam, engraved with a symbol that Mara recognized even from her position in the kitchen. The crown and sword of the king himself. The guard was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made a room feel smaller simply because he was in it. His dark, impassive eyes scanned the kitchen, passing over the gaping children, the shocked Lydia, before finally landing on Mara. She felt the weight of that gaze like a physical hand. "Lady Lydia Ashford?" the guard asked, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "Yes," Lydia rose, smoothing her robe, her face flushing with pleasure. The king had sent a guard for her? What an honor! "I am Lady Lydia. How can I—" "Lady Catherine Ashford," the guard interrupted, not looking at Lydia. She's on your property," Lydia stammered, confused. "Lady Beatrice Ashford? It's not here either. What is this?" "And," the guard said, his eyes still fixed on Mara, "Lady Mara Ashford." The world stopped. Mara felt the blood drain from her face. I am," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The guard gave a single nod. "So you, Lady Mara, are specifically requested to appear." "Wait," Lydia interjected, stepping between the guard and Mara. "There must be some mistake. Mara isn't. She doesn't go to court events. She's not qualified." The guard finally looked at Lydia, and there was something in his expression that made the younger woman take a step back. "There is no mistake, Lady Lydia. His Majesty King Sebastian summons the Ashford family to the selection ceremony tonight in the Great Hall of the Valley. All unmarried women between the ages of 25 and 45 must attend." "Not married?" Catherine, who had entered from the dining room drawn by the commotion, let out a laugh. "But we are married. Surely this isn't—" "The summons," the guard said, each word clear and deliberate, "specifically includes Lady Mara Ashford." Silence. Absolute, complete, deafening silence. Thomas dropped his spoon, which clinked against his bowl. Sophie began to whimper, but no one moved to comfort her. Everyone was too busy staring at Mara, as if she had suddenly grown a second head. "This is ridiculous!" Lydia finally exploded, her voice rising in pitch. "Mara?"
"The king wants Mara? For a selection ceremony? She's 42 years old." 42 years old, the guard added, with a hint of approval in his tone. "Specifically requested by His Majesty." The king was very clear in his instructions. His exact words were, "The woman known as Aunt Spinster must appear." If the previous silence had been complete, this one was absolute. Even the children seemed to feel the weight of that moment, the way it had fundamentally changed something in the room. Beatrice, who had just arrived, still in her lace nightgown, laughed. Not a polite laugh, but a loud, unbelievable cackle. Aunt Spinster? He called her that? Oh, that's rich. That's absolutely— "Silence," the guard said, and Beatrice's mouth clicked shut, her eyes widening in shock at being reprimanded like that. The guard turned back to Mara, his expression softening only slightly. "The ceremony begins at sunset. Will you be attending?" Mara couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. Her brain felt as if it were full of cotton, each thought moving through molasses. The king had summoned her. Specifically her. He had used the name she hated most, the nickname that had defined her for half her life. But he had summoned her. He knew she existed. Her voice came out in a croak. She cleared her throat. I'll go. Of course, I'll attend." The guard nodded, satisfied. He reached inside his armor and produced an envelope sealed with red wax stamped with the royal crown. "The instructions are here. Read them carefully. And, Lady Mara, try. The king asked me to deliver this message to you personally." He held out the envelope, and when Mara took it, their fingers touched for a brief moment. Her hand was cold, trembling. His were firm, warm, anchoring. "His Majesty told me to tell you, he saw her. He always saw her." And with that, the guard turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until the front door slammed shut behind him with a final bang. Mara stared at the envelope in her hands, hardly daring to believe it was real. "Let me see that," Lydia demanded, snatching it from Mara's hands before she could protest. She tore off the seal, her eyes scanning the words written inside, her face shifting from annoyance to disbelief to something very much like fear. "Tell them," Lydia whispered, "that the king is looking for a queen, that he will hold a selection, and that you—" She looked at Mara, her eyes wide with something between horror and envy. "You are among the candidates." The envelope fell from Lydia's lifeless fingers. Catherine picked it up, read it, passed it to Beatrice. Each wore the same expression: shock, disbelief, and, buried deep, so deep they probably didn't even recognize it, fear. Because if Mara, the invisible one, the forgotten one, the spinster aunt, could be seen by the king, what else could change? Mara stopped at the entrance to the great hall, and her world shrank. Hundreds of people, perhaps thousands. Dresses that glittered like jewels beneath the crystal chandeliers. Men in military uniforms with medals jingling on their chests. Young women, so young, with unwrinkled faces and laughter that tinkled like bells. And there she was, 42 years old, borrowed dress, calloused hands hidden behind her back. "Move," someone whispered behind her, pushing her forward. Mara stumbled inside. The door slammed shut behind her with a bang that sounded like a judgment. She saw her sisters immediately.
It was impossible not to see them. Lydia was wearing shocking pink, her dress so voluminous it would take up the space of 3 people. Catherine was in gleaming silver, diamonds dripping from her ears like drops of ice. Beatrice, of course, was wearing gold because she always needed to shine brighter than everyone else. They saw Mara and turned their backs on her. Literally. They turned around, as if she were a stranger, as if 15 years of raising her children could be erased with a simple movement of her skirt. Mara felt the blow, but wasn't surprised. Familiar pain was still pain, but at least you knew what to expect. She found a corner. There was always a corner. She had spent her whole life in corners, watching everyone else live under the spotlight. "It's her," someone whispered. "The spinster aunt? Poor thing, that 42? What is the king thinking? Maybe it's charity, making her feel special before it's too late." Muffled laughter, disguised glances, pity with a hint of cruelty. Mara clenched her hands together until her nails dug into her palms. Physical pain, pain she could control. And then the trumpets sounded. Not soft, polite trumpets, but war trumpets. The kind that announced battles. The kind that made your blood pump in your veins. Everyone in the room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Wine glasses stopped halfway to the lips. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The double doors at the end of the hall opened, and he went in. King Sebastian didn't resemble any king Mara had ever imagined. She expected velvet. She expected a heavy crown and a heavy cloak, and perhaps some fragility. Kings in stories were always old men on thrones, too distant to be real. This man was real. Tall, God, so tall, taller even than the guards flanking him. Broad shoulders beneath a simple black coat, without embroidery, without pomp, just black on black, contrasting with skin tanned by the sun, not by luxury. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, wild in a way that seemed intentional. It wasn't styled in perfect locks like the nobles around the hall. It was lived in, as if he had ridden through the wind and didn't care about appearances. But it was his eyes that captivated you. Gray, stormy gray, like clouds before a storm. And they were scanning the room, not vaguely, but purposefully, like a predator searching for something specific. Looking for.
4. And then they found Mara. And they stopped. The world disappeared. Not metaphorically, literally. Mara could no longer hear the crowd, could no longer see the hundreds of people between her and the king. There were only those gray eyes locked on hers, across all the distance, across all the years she had spent invisible. He saw her. God, he really saw her. And then he moved. Not toward the throne, not toward the platforms where young and beautiful candidates were positioned like flowers in vases. He walked straight through the center of the hall, towards her. The crowd parted like water, automatically, instinctively, because when a man like that moves with purpose, you either get out of the way or get run over. Mara couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She was stuck in place, watching this impossible man cross an impossible room for an impossible reason. He can't be coming to me, but it was. He didn't stop until he was only 3 steps away from her. So close she could see the small scar cutting across his left eyebrow. So close she could smell him. Horse and leather and something wild that made her stomach clench. "Lady Mara Ashford," he said. His voice was deep. Not loud, he didn't need to shout, but deep. The kind of depth you feel in your bones. Mara fell into an awkward bow, her knee almost touching the floor. Your Majesty." "Get up." It wasn't a request. She obeyed, her legs trembling so violently that she wondered if he could see. He could. Of course he could. Those eyes saw everything. "You know," Sebastian said, and God, why was the whole room so quiet? Why was everyone listening? "Why did I summon you?" Mara opened her mouth. She closed it. There were no words. There was no answer that made sense. "No, sir," she finally whispered. Something flashed before his eyes. It could have been approval. It could have been amusement. But it was too quick to grasp. Sebastian said, and now he wasn't just talking to her. He was talking to the whole room, to everyone. "I visited your village for the spring charity festival. Do you remember?" Mara blinked. 5 years ago. The festival. Yes, she had gone, briefly, just to leave a donation before rushing back home where Thomas was sick with a fever. I remember the festival, but I don't remember from seeing me," Sebastian finished, "because you weren't there to see nobles. You were there to help." He took a step closer. Mara could hear her own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. "There was a child," he continued, "a street boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Dirty, hungry. He stole an apple from a market stall." Memory flashed. God, yes, she remembered. The boy, so small, so frightened. "The merchant caught him," Sebastian said, his voice growing softer, dangerously soft. "He was going to break his wrist. Because stealing, even when you're starving, is a crime," Mara remembered. She remembered pulling the boy back, confronting the merchant, who was 3 times her size, placing her few coins in his hand. "You paid for the apple," Sebastian said, "and then you gave the boy his own bread as well." Wide eyes in the crowd, whispers beginning to grow louder. "I watched you leave the market," Sebastian continued, "and I noticed something." He paused. Mara waited, her heart in her throat. "In the morning," he said, "you were wearing a necklace, antique pearls, a family heirloom, I thought. By the afternoon, after paying that merchant, the necklace had vanished." No, 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 he couldn't have. "You sold it," Sebastian said, and there was no judgment in his voice. There was something more, something like admiration. "You sold a family inheritance to save a boy you didn't even know." The room erupted in whispers, shocked, disbelieving. Across the hall, Mara heard Lydia's high-pitched voice cut through the noise. "Mara, that was Grandma's necklace! You said you'd lost it!" Sebastian didn't look at Lydia. He didn't break his gaze from Mara. "She didn't lose," he said, his voice now icy. Ice directed at Lydia, at everyone who didn't understand. She chose. She chose a child over vanity, humanity over heritage. He then turned around, facing the crowd. Something I doubt anyone in this room would understand. Stunned silence. And then Sebastian turned back to Mara, closer now, so close that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "For years," he said, his voice now low and intense, just for her, "you raised 7 children who weren't yours. You sacrificed dances, courtships, your own life." He raised a hand. Mara held her breath as he extended it toward her face. It didn't touch. It just hovered, close enough to feel the warmth. "Your family took it as a right," he whispered. "Society took it as a failure. I take it as proof." Proof? Mara could barely form the word. "That you know what it means to lead with your heart." His hand fell, and then he stepped back, turning to face the entire hall. His voice thundered now, commanding, regal. "I need a queen." Instant silence. Absolute silence. Not a girl trained in etiquette. Not a young woman who knows how to dance but can't take care of anyone but herself. His eyes scanned the crowd. Debutantes paled, nobles shrank. I need someone who understands sacrifice, someone who puts the kingdom before themselves, someone who has already proven they can. He turned around. He looked at Mara. But the court demands proof. So I offer you a choice, Lady Mara. Mara couldn't feel her feet. She couldn't feel anything except the wild pounding of her heart. 3 tests, Sebastian said. Pass, and you become my queen. Fail, he paused, and you return to this life. The air left Mara's lungs. Queen? He said queen. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it.
It. Why me? Sebastian gave a half smile. It wasn't kind, it wasn't cruel, it was something more savage. Because for 5 years, he said, I looked for you at every ball, every party, every ceremony, and you were never there. He took one final step. Now he was so close that Mara could see golden flecks in his gray eyes. Because she was here, sacrificing herself behind the scenes. And I don't want a woman who knows how to walk into a ballroom. Her voice dropped to a whisper that only she could hear. I want one that knows how to stay in the shadows and still shine. Tears burned in Mara's eyes. And then, before she could speak, before she could think, Catherine pushed through the crowd, her face red with anger. This is absurd, she shouted. Mara has no education to be queen. She's just a nanny. Sebastian turned, slowly. Catherine froze. Lady Catherine, he said, and each word dripped with venom. Married to the merchant Edmund, correct? Yes, sir. Your sister, Sebastian said, spent 15 years managing a household with 7 children. She managed the budget, education, health, discipline. She did it without a husband, without an inheritance, without help. He took a step towards Catherine. She took a step back. You, Sebastian said, with a rich husband and 2 maids, what exactly do you manage? Your dress collection? Laughter erupted from the crowd. Not polite this time, genuine, cruel. Catherine blushed a deep red. Beatrice tried to intervene. But, sir, Mara is 42 years old. She is... Old, Sebastian roared, and the word echoed off the stone walls. She's 42 years old, full of wisdom. You're 32 years old, full of what? Wasted privilege? Beatrice recoiled as if she had been slapped. Lady Mara is 42 years old, Sebastian said, his voice filling every corner of the hall. 10 years older than you, Lady Beatrice, and yet infinitely more capable of ruling than you will ever be. He turned to the entire crowd. Does anyone else question my choice? Silence. Total silence. Complete. Terrified. And then Sebastian went back to Mara. He offered her his hand in marriage. The tests begin tomorrow, he said softly. Rest tonight. You'll need strength. Mara looked at that hand. So big, so strong. Calloused like hers, but from swords, not washbrushes. She took it. Electricity. Pure and simple. Running from the point of contact through every nerve ending until your whole body is alive, awake, for the first time in 15 years. Their eyes met, and Mara saw something in those gray eyes that made her world tilt. He wasn't pretending. He really wanted her, not out of charity, not to make a point, but because he saw her.
"See you tomorrow, Lady Mara," Sebastian said. And then he did something that nobody expected. He tilted his head. For her, the king, he bowed his head to the spinster aunt. The crowd gasped. And
Mara, for the first time in 15 years, felt something other than tiredness. He felt hope. Mara didn't sleep. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those gray eyes. She heard that deep voice saying, "I want one who knows how to stay in the shadows and still shine." She turned in the narrow bed of the room they had given her in the castle. Not an ordinary guest room. Oh no. This was a room for candidates. Silk on the cushions, soft carpets underfoot, a window overlooking gardens that looked like paintings, so different from the attic where he had slept for 15 years. But luxury did not calm the panic growing in his chest. Tomorrow. The tests would begin tomorrow, and she had no idea what to expect. Dawn arrived too quickly. A knock at the door. A young maid with downcast eyes and a soft voice. "Lady Mara, it's time." Mara dressed in the outfit they had left for her. Not a dress, pants. Soft leather pants and a tunic that allowed movement. Training clothes. His stomach churned. Training meant physical. It meant showing weaknesses. It meant failing publicly in front of everyone who expected her to fail. "The arena is waiting," the maid said gently. "But don't worry, everyone's nervous during their first test." Mara doubted that everyone was 42 years old and had hands that knew how to hold babies, not swords. The arena was packed. Not just crowded, overflowing. People were piled into the stands, hanging out of windows, crammed into every available space. The whole valley had come to watch Aunt Spinster try and fail to become queen. Mara stopped at the entrance, the sound of the crowd hitting her like a physical wave. Conversations, laughter, bets being placed. About her, against her. And there, in the first row of the stands, were his sisters. Lydia was wearing imperial purple today, her belly prominent, her smile confident. Catherine was an ice blue, arms crossed. Beatrice in coral, waving a painted fan as if she were at a picnic, not witnessing her sister's humiliation. They expected her to fail. They wanted her to fail. "Lady Mara Ashford!" The announcer's voice thundered through the arena. The crowd fell silent. Mara forced her feet to move, through the sand, toward the center. Each step seemed like walking towards an execution. "The first test," the announcer continued, his dramatic voice crafted for entertainment, "will measure physical strength and courage. Lady Mara will face—" Dramatic pause. The crowd leaned forward. "His Majesty, King Sebastian, in training combat." The world has tilted. No, 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 not the king, anyone but. And then he entered the arena. Mara forgot how to breathe. Sebastian wasn't wearing the formal armor she expected. He wasn't wearing the black coat from yesterday. He was wearing only leather pants and boots, nothing else. Nothing. More. Bare-chested, tanned, muscles that didn't come from luxury, but from real war. Scars cutting across his skin.
Like maps of battles survived, broad shoulders that seemed capable of carrying kingdoms, and those gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood boil. "God help me," Mara whispered. Sebastian listened, his lips curved. "God won't help you today," he said, his voice low, just to her. "But I will." He stopped in front of her, so close, so impossible. "Have you ever held a sword?" Sebastian asked. "No." "A shield?" "No." "Any weapon?" Mara thought of the brooms she used to chase naughty children. Pots and pans? His mouth trembled, almost a smile. Pots and pans. He turned around and signaled. A guard brought a wooden sword and a small shield. "Today," Sebastian said, taking her sword and pressing it into his hand, "you will learn." His fingers covered hers for a moment. Heat, pure heat, sinking into her skin. "What if I fail?" Mara whispered. Sebastian leaned in, his lips almost touching her ear. "Then I'll teach you until you can't fail." Shivers shot down his spine. He stepped back, picked up his own wooden sword. He twirled it once, casually, the weapon seeming alive in his hand. "Defensive stance," he instructed, his voice now loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Feet shoulder-width apart, knees bent, shield up." Mara tried to copy. She felt ridiculous, like a child playing soldier. "No," Sebastian said, and then he was behind her. Behind her. His chest pressed against her back, his hands covering hers on the shield, adjusting their grip. His warm breath on her neck. The crowd vanished. There was no one left. Only this man, his warmth, his strength enveloping her completely. "So," he murmured, his voice hoarse now. "Feel the weight. Let it anchor you." He moved her hands with his, demonstrating. His right hand slid from the shield to her waist, firming his position. Mara forgot her own name. "Breathe," Sebastian instructed gently. "Breathe into your feet. Let the earth hold you." She tried. She failed. She couldn't breathe when he was so close, when each breath brought his scent, leather, and something wild that made her stomach clench. Mara. Her name on his lips was both sin and promise. "Breathe." She obeyed. She forced the air in. Out. "Good," he murmured, and the word vibrated through his body. Then he stepped away, and Mara nearly collapsed without his support. Sebastian circled her slowly, his eyes now critical, assessing her. "You've carried children for 15 years. Your arms know how to hold them." He stopped in front of her. "But holding back isn't the same as striking." He raised his sword. "Defend." Mara raised her shield at the last second. His sword struck her with such force that it vibrated through her bones. Again. Bang. Again. Bang. Again. Bang, bang, bang. Her arms burned. Sweat ran down her back, but she held on. The crowd was silent now, not laughing, watching. "Why don't you fall?" Sebastian asked, still striking relentlessly. "Because," Mara
gasped. "I carried 7 children. You're just a man." He stopped. The arena held its breath. And then Sebastian laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real, deep, rich laugh that echoed off the stone walls. "Just a man!" he roared at the crowd. The crowd erupted. Applause, laughter, cheers. In the stands, Lydia paled. Catherine bit her lip. Beatrice stopped fanning. Sebastian turned his attention to Mara, and the laughter died, replaced by something warmer, more dangerous. "Attack me," he said softly. "Show me what 15 years of anger looks like." Anger. The word unlocked something inside Mara. 15 years of yes, 15 years of course, 15 years of swallowing every word she wanted to shout. She swayed. He blocked it easily. Stronger. It shook again. Harder. Again. As if you meant to say. And something broke. Mara screamed, a primal sound of buried pain and rage, and attacked. Not with technique, not with grace, but with every ounce of frustration she had been carrying. Sebastian blocked. He defended. But now he was retreating. Step by step. After step. After step. The crowd was on its feet now, roaring. "Yes!" Sebastian shouted. "That's it! Show me!" Mara didn't stop. She didn't think. She just felt. She felt every stolen year, every buried dream, every time she was called spinster aunt, as if that were all she was. His final blow struck his shield so hard that the wood cracked. Silence. Mara froze, panting, sweat dripping into her eyes, realizing what she had done. She had damaged the king's shield. I'm sorry, I didn't. Sebastian threw his broken shield aside. He took 3 long strides. He cupped her face in both hands. The crowd gasped. "Never," he said, his voice fierce, his eyes burning into hers. "Never apologize for being strong." Her thumbs traced her cheekbones, wiping away sweat, or perhaps tears. Mara couldn't tell. "You're magnificent when you're angry," Sebastian whispered, so low that only she heard. "I can't wait to see you happy." Mara's heart stopped. Then it started again, beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "The test," she managed to say. Sebastian smiled, slow, devastating, with praise. He turned to the crowd, keeping one hand on his waist, presenting it as a prize. "Lady Mara Ashford," he thundered, "passed the first test." The crowd erupted, not just politely, but wildly, whistles, cheers, shouts. In the stands, a simple woman dressed as a washerwoman was crying. Sarah, her friend Sarah, who had carried water for her all these years. And beside Sarah, Rowan, the young father, was laughing, his face beaming with joy. But her sisters were turned to stone, white faces, open mouths, finally understanding. This was real. Mara was real. Sebastian leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "Rest this afternoon. Tonight we'll have dinner. Just the 2 of us." He stepped away before she could respond, leaving her in
the center of the arena, her knees weak, her heart wild. Dinner was not in the great hall. It was on a private terrace, high up in the castle, where the sky was black velvet sprinkled with stars, and candles provided the only light. Mara arrived nervously, still in her simple green dress. She had nothing more grand, nothing appropriate for dining with a king. Sebastian was already there, reclining in a chair, still without his formal armor. Just a simple shirt, collar open, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He seemed human, not a king, just a man. "You came," he said, standing up as she entered. "You asked for it." "I asked. I didn't order." His eyes studied her. "You could have refused." "It could?" One corner of his mouth curved. "No." He pulled up a chair. "But I appreciate that you didn't think to refuse." Mara sat down, acutely aware of how close her chair was to his, how their knees almost touched under the small table. Servants brought food, nothing extravagant, bread, cheese, wine, fruit. "I didn't know," Sebastian said when they were alone, "what you like to eat." The admission made him seem vulnerable, and Mara noticed. He was nervous. The king was nervous. "This is perfect," she said gently. They ate in silence for a moment, not uncomfortably, something more, as if words could break whatever this fragile moment was. "Can I ask you something?" Mara finally said. "Anything. Why have you never gotten married? You're a king. You must have had," she hesitated, "hundreds of options." Sebastian set down his glass of wine. He looked at the stars. "Because they all wanted the crown," he said quietly. "None of them wanted the man." He turned back to her. "They looked at me and saw power. They saw wealth. They saw everything they could gain." We held her gaze. "Until I saw you give everything for a child you didn't even know. And I thought,
This is the woman I need. Not someone who wants to be queen, someone who can be. Mara felt tears burning. I don't know if I can. Sebastian reached across the table. He took her hand. Her skin was calloused, warm, and strong. I know. As? Because, he said, intertwining his fingers with hers, I spent 5 years looking for you. I investigated you. I discovered that you sold jewelry 12 times to pay for employees' doctors, that you taught peasant children to read on Sunday nights, that when your father died and left an inheritance, you divided it equally with your sisters, even though they had rich husbands and you had nothing. He shook her hand. Mara, you are the noblest woman I have ever known, and none of them wear a crown. A tear escaped, then another. Sebastian stood up and walked around the table. He knelt beside his chair. He knelt down. The king knelt before her. Don't cry, he whispered, his thumbs wiping her cheeks.
Unless they're happy tears, I don't know, Mara sobbed. I don't know what they are. I don't remember what happiness looks like. Something broke on his face. Pain, anger, for her, for the life she had. Then let me show you, he said sharply. And then he pulled her from her chair onto his lap, holding her close to his chest as she wept. 15 years of unshed tears soaking his shirt. He held her. He didn't speak. He just held her, one hand in her hair, the other firmly on her back. When she finally calmed down, Mara realized where she was. In his lap, head on his shoulder, hands gripping his shirt. God, she whispered, this is inappropriate. I should... Stay, Sebastian said, his arms tightening. Stay here. Why? Mara whispered against her neck. She felt more than she heard his answer. It vibrated through his chest into hers. Because, he said, for the past 15 days since I summoned you, I've been waking up thinking about you. Governing while thinking, what would Mara do? Going to sleep, wishing... He stopped. Mara tilted her head back. She met his eyes. Wishing for what? His hand slid from her hair to the nape of her neck. Firm, possessive. That you were by my side. Time stood still. The air between them was heavy, thick with unspoken intent. Sebastian, Mara breathed. No. The word was abrupt, painful. He leaned his forehead against hers. If I kiss you now, it won't be here. It won't be in secret. His thumb traced his jaw, his throat, stopping where his pulse pounded wildly. When I kiss you, he whispered, his lips touching her forehead, it will be in front of the entire kingdom, so everyone knows. You are my choice. Today, always. Mara's heart stopped. It started again, galloping. Is that a promise? She whispered. Sebastian smiled against his skin. It's a vow. Mara Ashford had spent 42 years waiting to be seen. And now, in the arms of a king, she finally understood. She hadn't been waiting for just anyone. I was waiting for him. But while Mara was beginning to believe in fairy tales, her sisters were plotting nightmares. Why would a forgotten woman become queen? That changed everything, and there were those who would do anything to stop it. The second test would arrive tomorrow, and with it, a danger none of them expected. Part 4. The second test was announced at dawn. Mara woke up to urgent knocking on the door. It was the same maid, but this time her eyes were wide with worry. Lady Mara, you need to get dressed, quickly. The board called for the test earlier. Something was wrong. Mara felt it in the vibration of the air, in the way the maid avoided her gaze. Why? What happened? There were formal objections to its advancement. Of course there was. The council chamber smelled of old books and even older power. 20 elders sat in a semicircle, their faces like stone, their eyes judging even before she entered. And there, in the front row of permitted spectators, were her 3 sisters. Sharp smiles, confident.
They had done something. Sebastian stood beside the throne, jaw clenched, eyes stormy. When Mara entered, he took a step toward her before forcing himself to stop. I couldn't help her here, not publicly. Lady Mara, Counselor Julius, a gaunt man with snake-like eyes, stood up. The second test will measure your ability to govern through wisdom and justice. He paused, a wicked smile on his face. 2 villages are disputing rights over a river. One wants to dam it for plantations. The other needs the river's flow for fishing. Both threaten war. Another advisor added, "You have 10 minutes to solve this. Fail, and you prove yourself incapable." 10 minutes, for decades of dispute. But first, Lydia stood up, her voice sweet as poison. "I'd like to question my sister's qualifications." Sebastian stepped forward. "Lady Lydia, this is not—" "That's proper procedure, Your Majesty," Julius interrupted gently. "Family objections are permitted by law." A trap, legal and perfectly executed. Lydia smiled. "My sister barely managed a household. How can she govern villages? She has no formal education." "She managed 7 children," Sebastian interrupted, his voice as cold as ice. "With our money," Catherine chimed in, standing up. "Money that we provided. Mara has never worked a day in her life." Lies, all lies, but said with conviction before the council. Mara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Is that true?" Julius asked. "Did you use your family's wealth?" Mara began. "She used our wealth," Beatrice exclaimed, the youngest, the most ruthless. "A parasite for 15 years. And now she wants to parasitize a kingdom?" The room erupted in whispers. Sebastian looked at Mara, a question in his eyes. "Let me destroy them." But Mara saw the game. If Sebastian defended her, it would prove her weakness. It would prove that she couldn't fight her own battles. She shook her head slightly. "I'll deal with it." She turned to her sisters. And for the first time in 15 years, Mara Ashford didn't swallow her words. "You're right," she said calmly. Shock. From the sisters, from the council, from Sebastian. "I used family money. Every penny that was left over after I paid for food, clothes, doctors, and teachers for 7 children that you should have raised." He took a step forward. "You want to talk about money? Let's talk." She turned to the council. "When my father died, he left an inheritance. By law, it should be divided equally among 4 daughters." Break. But 3 were already married. They had rich husbands. And one was still raising her children alone, without pay, without thanks. She looked at Lydia. "I could have kept it all, legally, but I split it equally, even though you didn't deserve a single cent." Lydia turned pale. "And do you know what I did with—"
"My share," Mara continued, her voice rising. "I sold jewelry to pay for employees' doctors. I bought books to teach poor children to read. I built a well in a village that had no clean water." He turned to the entire council. "Household management is nothing less than governance. It is its foundation. Budgets, negotiations. Resolving disputes between 7 children is training for resolving disputes between 7 villages." Stunned silence. "Then, yes," Mara finished, looking each advisor in the eye. "I used family money to rebuild the family they destroyed out of selfishness." He turned to his sisters one last time. "You called me a parasite? Look in the mirror." Lydia was red, Catherine pale, Beatrice trembling. And then Sarah, the laundress, rose from the galleries. "It's true! Lady Mara saved my son when he had a fever. She sold her ring to pay the doctor." Rowan, the young father, shouted, "She taught me to read without charging anything." One by one, ordinary people, poor,
forgotten. They stood up and bore witness. The council watched, fascinated. Julius cleared his throat. "Very well. The objection is rejected. Now, the test. You have 10 minutes, Lady Mara. Resolve the river dispute." Mara took a deep breath. She thought, and then she saw. "Would the dam be seasonal?" she asked. Julius blinked. "Not specified." "And does fishing happen all year round?" "Only spring and autumn." "So," Mara said, "a temporary dam. Village A builds a dam in the summer and winter for irrigation. Village B fishes freely in the spring and autumn. Village A builds cisterns to store summer water. The kingdom subsidizes the construction with the money it would spend on war. Both win. The kingdom saves money. Nobody dies." Silence. Julius's mouth dropped open. "That's brilliant." Sebastian smiled, proud, fierce. "More questions?" he asked the council, his voice dangerous. Nobody spoke. "So, Lady Mara passed the second test." Applause, unpolished, thunderous. But in the galleries, Beatrice whispered something to Lydia, and Lydia smiled. It wasn't over yet. The third test would be isolation. 3 days alone in an outpost, proving she could lead without support. Mara mounted her horse at dawn. Sebastian came to say goodbye in the privacy of the stables. 3 days, he said. Then you come back. And when you come back... It wasn't over. He just looked at her lips. "Be careful," he whispered. "Your sisters are too quiet." I should have listened. After an hour on the trail, the saddle broke. Mara fell, hard. Twisted ankle, horse running away. And at the edge of the forest, he saw a flash of pink silk. Beatrice, watching, smiling, and then disappearing. Sabotage. Pain shot through Mara's leg. She couldn't walk. Sun was setting. Alone. Wounded. I was going to die here. But then, thunder of hooves. Sebastian burst from the forest like vengeance incarnate, dismounting before the horse came to a complete stop. "Hurry!" He fell to his knees beside her, his hands scanning.
"For injuries. How could you?" she gasped. "I knew it." Hoarse voice. "I knew something was wrong. You should have arrived 2 hours ago." He picked her up in his arms, easily, as if she weighed nothing. "Your sisters did it," she whispered. "I know." Deadly voice. "And they will pay." He placed her on his horse. He mounted behind her, arms around her, protecting her completely. They rode in heavy silence. "I should give up," Mara finally said. "I shouldn't." "Never." The word was a roar. "Never say that." He pulled her tighter. "You don't give up. Not after everything. Not when we're so close." "Close to what?" Sebastian buried his face in her hair. "For you to be mine." 3 days later, the final test was announced. Not in the council chamber, in the great hall. The entire kingdom was present. Mara entered, her ankle still sore but bandaged. Blue dress. The same one she had bought at 27, altered. Perfect. Sebastian was standing at the foot of the throne. When he saw her, something shattered in his face. "The third test," Julius announced, "was sabotaged. Therefore, it's cancelled. But there's a final petition." Lydia stood up. "Formal objection. Mara didn't finish." "Silence." Sebastian's words echoed like thunder. He descended from the steps of the throne. He crossed the hall, straight to Mara. The crowd held its breath. "Enough with the tests," Sebastian said, his voice filling every corner. "Enough with the proofs. Enough with the doubting." He took Mara's hands. "Lady Mara Ashford, for 15 years you were called the spinster aunt, as if that was all you were, As if your dreams didn't matter, as if you didn't matter. He turned to the crowd. Her family used her. Society forgot her. But I saw her. He went back to Mara, and there were tears in his eyes now. I saw you sacrifice everything. I saw you love without being loved. I saw you give and give and give until there was nothing left. He knelt down in the middle of the hall. The king knelt before the spinster aunt. He pulled a ring from his pocket, a blue sapphire, like his eyes, like his dreams. For 15 years, he said, his voice breaking, you said yes to everyone. Yes to your sisters. Yes to the children. Yes to everyone who needed you. He held the ring. Now I ask, can you say yes to yourself, to your happiness, to being loved as you deserve? Tears streamed down Mara's face. Mara Ashford, now it's your turn. Your turn to be a priority. Your turn to be queen. Not because I need you. The voice lowered to a whisper, but everyone still heard it. But because I love you. Will you marry me? Time stood still. The kingdom held its breath. And Mara looked at her sisters, pale, destroyed. She looked at Sarah, Rowan, and Mira, crying tears of joy. He looked at this man, this king, this
impossible figure, this miracle, she said, her voice clear. I waited, I doubted, I diminished myself. Now I understand. You didn't want me despite my age. Who am I? For everything I've lived through, for everything that has made me who I am, for everything that has made me capable of loving you like this. He extended his hand. Yes, Sebastian, 1,000 times yes. He put the ring on her finger. He stood up, he pulled her close to him, and he kissed her, deeply, completely, without shame. The hall exploded, applause like thunder, shouts of joy, music bursting forth in triumph. When they parted, Sebastian whispered against her lips, "My queen, my king." Mara stood before the mirror in her royal bedroom, hands on her slightly rounded belly. Sebastian came in and hugged her from behind. "How are you feeling?" "Scared, happy, still can't believe it." He kissed her neck. "Believe me, in 6 months you'll be a mother, for real." Tears welled in her eyes. 15 years taking care of other people's children. And now you'll have yours, ours. He turned her over, he knelt down, he kissed her belly. "Some stories," he whispered, "begin at 42. Mara stroked her hair, and they are the most beautiful of all. Mara Ashford was called the spinster aunt for 15 years. Today, she is Queen Mara, wife, mother-to-be, leader. Not despite his 42 years of age, but because of them. Because some women don't need youth, they need recognition. And when they are finally seen, they don't shine, they reign. Did this story touch your heart? Have you ever felt invisible, forgotten, as if your best years were behind you? Mara proved that it's never too late. It's never too late to be seen. It's never too late to be loved. It's never too late for your own story to begin. Leave a comment now and tell me, if you were Mara, would you have accepted the king's tests, or would you have run away from the risk? Start with, "I would accept," or "I would run away," and tell me why. The best answers will be read in the next video. And if this story made you feel something, anything at all, hit that subscribe button. Because every week I bring stories like this, stories of mature women, forgotten, undervalued. They find their power, their love, their kingdom. You are not alone on this journey, and its story,
It's still being written. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's write together. Because some queens, they are crowned after the age of 40. And that could be you.